Now, before we get working on the tree, I should mention something pretty important, our naming convention. Now, we can see that we've added lots of rocks around, but for the fact that we did not rename the first object we created before creating other instances, every other instance has the same name that we do not want. So we would now have to manually rename everything, and that's the work I've given myself. So I'm going to rename this to rock, and you have to do that for everything. I will just rename everything to rock. I can Control A if I don't want to keep on typing, and you don't need to start writing .001. Once you rename an object with the same name of an existing object, it's going to automatically be renamed accordingly for you. So that works fine for me. Good. And once we've done that, we're going to select everything, all the rocks, and create a new group and name it rock, so that we can be consistent with our file arrangement. Good. So now we have the rock set up, we have the chair and everything. We just want to add a tree, a palm tree, to have that beach effect to it. So I will go ahead to hide everything so that I can just have a fresh place to start, and I will get the cursor to the center, Ctrl C, and we can start from here. My people will say that there are many roads to the market, in the sense that you can actually achieve what you want to do, in this case, through many other ways. So what I'm just showing you right now is one of the ways to creating a tree, but you can research and you see tons of other ways to do so. Since we want to create a palm tree, we would need the palm tree to have rough edges, and broad leaves and some split leaves and all. So we would simply be starting with a cylinder, because it has that shape of the trunk that we need. Before I go ahead, I will ensure that I tap out of the snap mode by clicking Shift Tab, and I can now add a cylinder. Let's say Shift A, mesh, and cylinder. So I have this fine looking cylinder here. So before we go ahead, I'm just going to rename this as tree, and we can now start. Now we have this tree trunk here, but what we want to do is I would use this as a base for the rough edges, in the sense that I will build up the tree trunk using small chunks of this cylinder. To do so, I will first like to edit this a little bit so that it has this conical look to it. So let's say we tab into edit mode and go over to the bottom and click on S to scale, and scale it down a bit. So now we have this nice looking effect for the first piece that will make up the tree trunk. The next thing I will do is to add a modifier, and you guessed right, the array modifier, because I do not want to keep on making conical shapes anymore. So I can just go to the add modifier. Remember, you should be sure to select the object in the scene. So once you go to the add modifier under your properties window and you go to array, we will now want to constrain that modifier to the z-axis. So we would remove the value for the x-axis, go to the z-axis and type on 1 for now, and we will increase the count because the tree should be pretty tall. So let's say 8. That's good. And of course we do have our tree trunk looking a bit bent. For a palm tree, it's gonna give that nice, bent effect. And to do so, we would be using another object called the curve. Now let me collapse this. The curve in Blender helps us to define a path that an object that has been assigned to it can follow. In this case, I can just go to my viewport window and click on Shift A and add a curve. So now you can see that there are many options to select from, but we can start with this Bezier curve. And if you hide this tree trunk, you can see this shape that you're getting, and this is good. We can now decide to scale it up. It acts like an object that you can do the same thing of scaling up or reducing. So let's say I want to scale it by, let's say, 8, and I can also rotate it in such a way that it will be aligned to the center, because remember, we want the tree trunk to follow the path for this curve. So I will need to rotate the curve to go through the z-axis. So to do so, I will just, let me hide the tree again. To rotate this curve to be aligned to the z-axis, I will first ensure that it is straight. In this case, the curve usually starts from this curve here and ends over here. So I can tab into edit mode, and you can see that there are 2 dots that signify the start of the curve and the end of the curve. So for this case, I will select this bottom part of the curve and select this edge here, because it will allow me to control how curvy this area is, and I just want it to be straight to start with. So I will use the rotation tool. I'll click on R to rotate it, and you can see that it's following the cursor. In this case, I can just click on Control to snap it so that it will be aligned. So once I have it snapped to the z-axis, I can now go ahead to tab out of edit mode. So now I can go ahead to rotate this curve to go through the z-axis by clicking on R to rotate it, and I'll be rotating it on the y-axis, so I'll constrain it to y. And as you can see, -90 does the trick for us. So -90, and we have it straight. So to align this curve to the trunk, we can go to the front view once more, and we would need to tab into the edit mode. So to not get confused, is the center here that defines the start point, the center here that defines the end point. So what we want to do is click on A to select everything, click on G to move it, click on Z to constrain it to the Z-axis, and we can click on Shift so that our movement is gradual once we get to that center point, and move it upwards. So now we have the origin point somewhere in the middle. We can now get to work with it. So I will tab out of the edit mode, and I kind of like how the curve is aligning to the center of this trunk now. So we can go ahead to add the modifier that is going to help us to curve this trunk. To do so, we will go back to this trunk here and add a curve modifier, and the curve modifier is under the deformation modifiers. So we can go to curve, and we can select the curve object. So in this case, we'll select the bezier curve, and now if we were to go back to the curve and click on tab, whatever deformation we carry out for the curve, it's also going to affect the trunk. So we can now click on R, and you see the way it's deforming alongside the curve. So I like this effect. We can tab back to the object mode, and let's see how it will look in the solid view. So I think I like what I'm seeing right now. And remember that we still have the the array modifier for this trunk, so you can increase it if you like, but I think we're good with this for now. So this is one of the ways to carry out non-destructive modeling, in the sense that as you edit an object, you still allow for future modifications. That's non-destructive modeling. So before we dive right into adding leaves for this tree, we might want to make the top part of this trunk to be thinner compared to the bottom, and right now we can't do so because we just added this modifier but we have not applied it. Now this is what I mean. If you go to the edit mode and you want to, let's say, make the top of this area to be smaller, it's not going to work for these objects here because they are instances of the original object. So the only edit you can carry out is for the original object. So you can see, if you click on S, Shift Z, you can see what is happening over here. So what we need to do is to say bye bye to the modifier for the tree trunk, for the array modifier, and we can go to this drop down here and click on apply. And once we do that, we have created a new object of what you're seeing here. So if you tab into edit mode, each of these surfaces are now editable. So we can click on one of the surface, and let's say we want to edit it in such a way that it will affect the others. Yes, we would need to use proportional editing. So we click on O and click on S, and now we can scroll out to affect the other parts. So I think we're good with this. We can now go ahead to adding the leaves.